My name is Martin Farber. I'm 77 years old. In October of 1956, I decided to enter the Army for 2 years as a draftee. I had been living in a one-bedroom apartment with my mother and my grandfather for a few years, and I didn't want to continue that. Getting my own place was financially impossible, much as it is for kids today. I did have one thing on my side, though. I had travel fever. I wanted to see something of the world. So rather than wait for the draft board to call me, I told them that fall I was ready to be drafted. My earliest memory is standing alone on a subway platform after depositing the token that the government had sent to me for the ride to Whitehall Street in Lower Manhattan for processing into the service. My 2 years had begun. I was 22 years old. You only spend a very short time at Fort Dix, and I had some people visit me from the family to see me off. And from there, we got our orders of where we were going. And in my case, it was to a place called Fort Hood, Texas, for basic training. You are testing yourself, and you're being tested by other people, but you want to see how much your body can take, how much you can endure. It's not as tough as the Marines, but it's hard enough. And when you're that age, after a couple of months of that, you're in very, very good condition, in very good shape, probably the best shape of my life. I managed to meet a lot of kids from New York, and we bonded pretty quickly. After the 8 weeks of basic training, you are given a job somewhere on the base. And my first job was working in supply. It was a Signal Corps outfit, and what they did was take care of all the radios and all the equipment. And I worked in supply, giving out tubes and any parts that the repairmen needed. And that's what I did for most of the time in Fort Hood. And then we boarded a ship, a troop ship, called the Derby. And from that, we sailed on to Bremerhaven. I don't know if it was buses or trains, and took us to Frankfurt, which was going to be our base for the next year and a half. And then I was assigned to something I really liked, which was called TINE, Troop Information and Education. The best part of the job was I was given a Jeep, and on Saturday mornings, because they found out I had been a teacher, my job was to get everyone together in the auditorium and present some kind of a program, which was usually a movie. And that was fun because I could go to the supply place in downtown Frankfurt where they kept all the movies, pick something out that I think they'd like. It was all military stuff, of course. They have something in the Army called police call. A bunch of guys go out in the courtyard or wherever, and you line up shoulder to shoulder and you walk through the area, and anything you see in front of you, cigarette butts, litter on the ground, it's like a giant vacuum cleaner. And you walk across and you pick it up and it's all disposed of. And you walk back again in case you missed anything, and by the time you're done, the area is nice and clean. And then you double up, which means you get in double file, and you march back to the barracks. On this particular day, a friend of mine named Murray and I, for no reason at all, decided to skip rather than march the way we should. And Murray didn't get caught, I got caught. And before I know it, I was in front of the company commander, and he said, "Farber, I don't understand you. You're an educated man. Why would you do something like that?" I said, "Because it's very hard for me to take the Army seriously, sir." The next day I found myself in what's called the motor pool. That's where they grease all the Jeeps and trucks and everything. Then I got called into the company commander's office again. And he said, "Farber, tomorrow I have to make a speech on the Constitution." I said, "Yes." And he says, "I can't do it." He was a captain, but apparently he was afraid to get in front of a large group of people and talk. He says, "You were a teacher. says, if you do it for me, you can go back to your job in intelligence and troop information and education. And that'll be it. I said, sure, I don't know anything about the Constitution except, you know, very basic things. He said, no problem, you just have to read this paper, and all over Germany and all the bases, they're doing the exact same lesson. You just have to read it, take about half an hour, and if you do that for me, you can go back to your old job. I said, okay. And I read it, and one guy at the end, I remember his name, Jim Byrne, he raised his hand and he asked me a question about the Constitution that was so complex I had no way I could answer it. So I remembered being a teacher, and I said, Private Byrne, if you see me after class, I'll be glad to answer that for you because I don't want to hold everybody else up, which I knew was working for me because nobody wanted to be held up. We drove down to Berchtesgaden in my friend's Volkswagen, and we came across the most beautiful hotel called the General Walker Hotel. Used to be used during the war by Hitler's higher-up officers, all the elite officers. So being Jewish, it was kind of ironic that we would be occupying where these Nazis had such a good time. But what we did was we signed in for the retreat, for the 7-day retreat, put our names in the book, and rather than staying, we got in the car and we left and we started exploring. We went to Vienna, and we went to Salzburg, we went to a lot of places in Austria. Saberhawk was an all-Germany maneuvers practiced by everybody at the same time. So every unit in Germany from every town would go out into the field. You have to remember, even though I had a lot of fun in Germany, the purpose of our unit was to stop the Russians, if ever, from crossing to the west and going through Germany and taking over Europe, because at that time there were genuine fears that the Russians might do that. So this was practice. It was war games. My job, like I mentioned before, is to drive a Jeep, and I drove this Major, and it was the dead of winter. It was snowing, the Jeep was open, and the snow was piling up on my head, and I must have had 6 inches of snow on my head. And his job was to read the map and lead everybody else behind us to where we were going, because I had no idea where we were going, into the woods. And there were tanks behind us and all kinds of trucks. So we're driving along, and I hear a crash. And we turned around, and one of the tanks had turned. And you know how a gun sticks out of the front of a tank? He had made the turn, and he knocked off the corner of a building. Toward the end of, well, toward the middle of '58, the spring actually, I was looking forward to getting out of the Army and getting back and beginning my career. But as you remember, I was drafted in October. That means I would get out in October, 24 months. But they had a policy then that if you could prove that you had a teaching job, since there was a shortage, you could get out 3 months earlier, which was very appealing to me. But how do I do that? I can't go for an interview in the United States when I'm in Germany. As it worked out, one of those lucky things in life, I had a very good friend of mine who was teaching in New Jersey, and he was finishing up 1 year at a school district that he didn't like that much, and he was going to leave. And he said, would you like it? I said, yes, but how can I get for an interview? He says, I'll talk to the superintendent. He spoke to the superintendent. The superintendent wrote a letter to my company commander telling me that I had the job, which was amazing because he didn't know me and he just went on the word of my friend. So I got orders that instead of getting out in October, I would be getting out in August of '58, which was perfect because I could start teaching in September. And that's what happened. I was discharged at Fort Dix, where I started, and I sailed home. And that's the story. I began teaching in that job in New Jersey in September. I stayed there 1 year, and then after that year, I moved on to Port Washington, where I stayed for 34 more years.